That's why we welcome this review by the ministry. There's an opportunity, I think, to standardize the definition of street checks across the province and to demonstrate that it is an important and valuable tool for officers to help prevent and solve crimes that are occurring in our neighborhoods.
Right now, when is a police check okay? Like, when would you guys perform one right now?
Well, when our officers have an observation or an interaction where there's a nexus around potentially criminal activity or suspicious behavior, that is an incident where we would support and encourage our officers to conduct street checks. As an example, if a member of the community at 3 o'clock in the morning calls us because there's something that they observe, that individual is walking in the neighborhood that doesn't belong in that area, and they've recently been hit by break-and-enters or thefts from vehicles, they'll call us at 3 o'clock in the morning. Our officers will respond. If we find the individual, we'll have a conversation. And if the individual doesn't belong in the community, doesn't reside there, and has no valid reason, and may have a criminal record associated with thefts, and there's no grounds for arrest, we will collect that information. That'll go in our database, and that may help us identify future solvency with respect to crimes that have occurred in that neighborhood.
How many police checks do you think are done every year by Ottawa Police?
On average, there's about 4,000 street checks that are done over the thousands and thousands of interactions that happen on a regular basis.
And just finally, some minority groups feel that they're targeted more than others. Does your data support that? Is that something that you also have concerns about?
We certainly hear those complaints, and I think that's why these types of conversations are important. And I look at the work that we've done in our traffic stop race data collection project, where we've had a lot of discussions with our visible minority communities and racialized communities around the issue of racial profiling. And I think the conversations and the better understanding amongst the parties involved is always productive and helps us to come to a better understanding of how we do our business, but also the impact that may have on our communities.
Great, thanks so much. I appreciate you doing that
You're
at the
welcome.
end. Yeah,
Thank you very
thanks so much.
And what you're hoping to get out of them as well before you come up with these new rules in the fall.
As you may recall, over a month ago, we announced that the government of Ontario will be bringing regulations dealing with street checks, make sure that we have a clear definition as to what street checks are and consistent safeguards across the province in order to protect the rights of Ontarians and give police the capacity to keep our communities safe as well. Part of that process is, of course, to consult with Ontarians. We're doing 5 consultations, first one being in Ottawa, 2 in Toronto and London and Thunder Bay as well. Not to mention we have an online discussion document as well available on ontario.ca/safety, where we're encouraging Ontarians to provide their feedback that will help government draft these regulations.
Why did the government decide to make this move now? Was there something that motivated these consultations and the decision to look at the practice and try to change it?
Well, I think the most important thing is we have zero tolerance when it comes to any kind of racial profiling or discrimination. There were some serious concerns and allegations were raised, primarily in the context of Toronto, that people were being racially profiled based on the color of their skin or ethnicity. That's a serious issue. We need to make sure that all our policing actions are guided by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and also the Ontario Human Rights Code. Not to mention the Police Services Act is very clear in saying that constitutional rights of Ontarians should always be protected. So we felt very strongly that it is time that we consult Ontarians, we better understand what street checks are, and also prevent any arbitrary stops that police may engage in for no reason or cause or without any suspicious activity, simply just to collect information.
Carding has been an issue for years in Toronto. Why is it taking so long for the government to attack?
Well, again, we've been very clear that there has been zero tolerance when it comes to any racial profiling or discrimination, and I, as the Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services, was watching and observing the whole issue very closely. Had the opportunity to meet with a lot of people, both police and community advocates, to better understand. And one thing that became very obvious to me that the definition varies from parts of the province to other parts of the province, and the practice varies as well. In fact, even the police said that I think it will be helpful and beneficial that we do have one set of regulations that will outline in a consistent manner what the practice is and what the safeguards are.
Once these regulations are put forward, how are you going to make sure that the different police forces are following through with them? Will that be up to the chief of police, or will yourself or perhaps somebody else from the government be checking up to make sure that they're being followed?
So the regulations will be under the Police Services Act. That makes them enforceable under the legislation. All police services, if they choose to conduct street checks, would have to comply by the regulation. If they fail to do so, then there are consequences under the Police Services Act that the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services on behalf of the Government of Ontario can take.
Based on conversations you've been listening in on this afternoon, have the responses been sort of what you've expected? Are you in line with that?
Yeah, it's a very active conversation. I'm very happy to hear the diversity of the people who are attending from our community so that we have a varied perspectives represented in these consultations. And yes, the themes are very similar. Themes around how do you define carding? Is the challenge is arbitrary stops for no cause or reason simply to collect information? Is there validity of talking to people when there is suspicions of criminal activity? Questions around how long you keep the information, the manner in which you collect the information. Do you destroy it after certain years or not? And the other important element is training and ensuring that our police officers are properly trained, especially in anti-bias training, so that you prevent any incidents of racial profiling or discrimination.
Suspicion is a pretty broad term. Can you define how you're going to define the process and definition of suspicion to be able to start a carding process?
Well, that's exactly the consultations we're doing right now. We're talking to Ontarians to get more substantive meaning to these type of definitions. We also, of course, having very focused conversations with groups like the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, Police Association of Ontario, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, African Canadian Legal Clinic, to get a better understanding of their perspective and get into detailed understanding as well. In addition to that, we've also, of course, working very closely with the Ontario Human Rights Commission and their expertise on this area, and the Information and Privacy Commissioner and the expertise they bring as we move forward with the development of regulations.
Do you agree with Andre Morin that the process is illegal?
Well, again, I think it all depends on the definition, and that's why the consultations are very important. From our perspective, one point is very clear, that there's zero tolerance when it comes to any kind of racial profiling or discrimination, and we do want to prevent arbitrary stops by police which may take place for no cause or reason, simply to collect information.
I think what people are concerned about is whether there's bias in the way that these things are being applied. We can talk a lot about what is a street check, how do you define it, but are you concerned that there's actual bias in the way the police forces across Ontario have been using street checks?
Well, I have a lot of confidence in our police services. They work extremely hard to keep our communities safe. Could there be elements of bias? Perhaps. That's why I think training is extremely important, to make sure that all our officers understand how the rules apply, what the constitutional guarantees are. Diversity in police service, therefore, is extremely important from that perspective as well. When you speak with our police officers, you speak with our police chiefs, they'll tell you they spend a lot of time providing for appropriate training, and I think part of that conversation is making sure that there are clear rules across the province, which will make it easy for police services and police services boards to have procedures based on those regulations, and of course training as well based on those regulations.
Do we know across Ontario how many people's names are in some kind of database, street check database? We know for Ottawa, but for people who committed no crime, but for some reason they're being kept track of?
It's difficult to have that information, and again, one of the challenges, because there is no province-wide regulation, one of the other benefit of our having this regulation would be that it then gives the power to the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services under the Police Services Act to be able to do audits, to be able to do the oversight, and be able to get that data available, which I think in the future is very important to evaluate the usefulness of these type of regulations.
So would there be time limits then on how long this info is kept? Do you expect
We're asking that question. We've asked in our consultation. We're asking this question as to how the information should be collected, how it should be recorded. Should there be a time frame on how long the information should be kept, keeping in mind that there may be a legal case and that information may be useful. And we're not only asking Ontarians and our stakeholders, but also the Information and Privacy Commissioner, who's expert in those legal matters, to give us guidance in terms of limits on the use of the information and the time frame it should be kept.
So is OCAP a stakeholder as well? And how is the decision process going to be done? Are they just stakeholders, and who is making the final decision?
The final decision is made by the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services. The final decision, of course, will be made by the Government of Ontario. All organizations like the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police or the Canadian Civil Liberties Association are stakeholders. They're important partners like Ontarians who we're conversing with and tapping into their expertise. Thank you.